Hello children, and welcome to your DT lesson. Today we're going to start creating our outfit for our teddy or soft toy. I'm going to share with you some top tips, some ideas for starting off, and also we can think about some problems that we might need to overcome. The first thing you'll need to do is to think really carefully about the order that you need to make things in. For example, I know my yellow fabric I need to use for the outfit, but also I want to use it for the headdress. So I can't use all of my yellow fabric on the outfit first of all. What I did first of all to do that is I had a look at the size of my yellow fabric. I need to know the measurement around Florence's head so I can measure the headdress. We call that the circumference. I'm going to use a measuring tape just to check the distance around her head. Now, I think I'm going to get the headdress to come underneath the ears and round. So, if I use my measuring tape, check I'm starting on 0, and place it around her head, I can see that it's about 32 centimetres. So I've got my fabric here and I need to decide where to cut my 32 centimetres from. Let's have a see. My fabric there is around about 31 centimetres. So I know that I'm going to need to cut a strip of fabric from one of the sides. I've done that already. I used a ruler for a straight line, drew a line down it, and then carefully used sharp scissors to cut the fabric. You might need a grown-up to help you when cutting fabric. So think carefully about which step you need to do first. Probably the trickiest part of this project will be getting your fabric the correct size to fit your soft toy. Now, one way of doing that is to make a paper template. But it is tricky to make a paper template first because your teddy is not flat. It's obviously a larger distance around here than if it was just a flat shape. So what I've decided to do is I've decided to use the rest of my fabric for the top, and I can always cut it a bit smaller if I need to. Remember, we always need to measure twice and cut once, because once we've cut it, we can't go back. So what I've decided to do is to use the rest of my yellow fabric for the top. Now I've kept it folded in half here because I know that half of it will be for the front and half of it will be for the back. This bit at the top here, where it's folded, is like the shoulders. I know that my fabric needs to be in the middle for the neckline. So I'm imagining here that my neckline is going to come down the centre of my fabric. Then afterwards I'm going to think about the arms. On my design I chose to do a V-neck. So I'm going to mark out on my fabric a V shape now. I've used some paper first to create a template. Here is a V. Now I'm not sure yet whether this is going to be large enough, but I want to make it a little bit smaller first because I can always make it bigger afterwards. On my fabric I'm going to find the centre so that my neck line can be right in the middle. So I'm just going to fold my fabric over, and with my finger I'm just going to make sure I know where the centre is. Then I know I can place my template into the middle. When we use a template, we can then use a pen or a pencil to draw around it so that we know where to cut. This fabric is the same on both sides, so there isn't really a front and a back, but if it was a patterned fabric, we'd want to draw it on the back so that the pen wouldn't be seen. Now I'm just going to follow my template and draw the V onto here. I would like the V to come down the front and on the back, so I'll do the same on the back and then I'll cut out the shape. So now I've cut out that V out of the fabric, and it's time for me to see whether it's the right size to fit my bear. So when I open it up, you'll see that I've got the front and the back, and the hole for the head is in the middle. Let's see if you'll fit Florence. A good thing about a soft toy is that you can always squash it a little bit to get it to fit properly. Perfect! That is a good size neckline for my bear. If you're struggling to get yours to go over the head, you can of course measure it and make it a little bit larger. Or one thing you can do is at the back you can just put a small slit down here which will help it to open more as the bear puts on the costume. You might remember that we had to do that with some of your penguin tabards at Christmas time because the head holes were a little bit small. Now I've got Florence wearing the top, I need to think a little bit about my seams because I want to stitch down the sides. Now, a good thing to do here is to perhaps just estimate how tight you would like it to be on your teddy. It's better to make it loose because lots of you have put a belt around the middle, so that will gather the fabric anyway. But I'm just going to look here about where I would like my seams to go. And I'm going to use my measuring tape just to estimate how far in I need to put the seams because I'm going to cut this bit for the armholes. So I'll just hold the two layers together, use my measuring tape just to see how far I'd like to put it in. I would say no more than 4 centimetres for my bear here. You'll need to measure it really carefully. You might find if you've got some pins at home, you could pin it because then you can see what it will be like when you take it on and off your bear. So I know that for my design, I would like to cut my fabric about 4 centimetres in. I'll do a cut here and along here and the same that side. I need to make sure I leave quite large armholes so it's easy to get on and off my bear. Now I measured 4 centimetres, but I think I might not cut quite that much because I need to leave something called a seam allowance. Let me show you what I mean. I've got a scrap piece of fabric here and I've started to stitch it. You'll notice that my stitching is not right at the edge because it would fall apart, it wouldn't hold the fabric securely. So my stitching is a little way in. Here you can see this is what we call the seam allowance. This amount of fabric here that you need to leave extra because then it will be a smaller measurement than what you think it would be. Now I've started doing some stitching just to show you what it looks like when you do a seam. Florence is a bear who has been sewn together. And this is what we call the seam here, where 2 pieces of fabric are joined together. But you'll notice on Florence that you can't really see any of those stitching, any of the stitching or the joins. And this is how it's been made. You do your stitching one side, and then when you've finished, you turn it inside out, and your stitching is now on the inside so it can't be seen. Now I chose to use this thread that was a contrasting colour. That's just so you can see it on the video. In real life I would probably use a white cotton because it would match my fabric, and even then when I turn it inside out it would still be tricky to see those stitches in the seam. One other thing I'd like to show you is how to keep your fabric still whilst you're sewing. Let's pretend I was going to sew these 2 edges together here, these 2. Now I might end up starting to sew and it might sort of start shifting round, so I want to keep this fabric still. This is when we can use pins. I've got some pins here and these are called dressmaking pins because they're used for clothing. They usually have, it looks a bit like a bead at the head of the pin, and that's so you can find them easily in your fabric. So I'm just going to show you how I would pin my fabric to keep it still. Here's my seam along here, so I'm going to put pins along here to keep it secure. I put my pin into the fabric, it goes through both sides of the fabric, and then I lift it up and push it out the front of the fabric, and there it is. I leave another space. I don't need them too close together unless you've got a really slippery fabric, and then I put another pin in here. I might do one more. That means my fabric's going to hold together whilst I sew it, and it's not going to come apart. One other thing you can use pins for is for keeping small pieces still whilst you sew. I wanted to put some shapes on my fabric made out of felt. I made a little paper template first, and then you can test if it's the right size before drawing it onto my felt. You can use a pen to do that. That means if I make a mistake on the paper, I'm not wasting the felt. Once you've got your fabric shape, if it's a big shape and it might need to be kept still whilst you sew, you can place it on there, and again you can use a dressmaking pin just to hold that in place. It might be that you'd like to attach all your fabric shapes, your felt shapes, with pins first, and then you can decide where to move them round to before you sew them on. Hopefully that's helped you with some ideas about how to make your product. A good designer will always know when to adapt their designs to. So if you start making and you realise something is more challenging than you thought it would be, of course you can adapt your design to make it easier for you. A good designer is also great at problem solving. So think carefully about how you might solve problems whilst you're creating. Good luck everybody. Bye bye.